Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our headlines. Protests over immigration arrests have spread across the United States, including New York, Atlanta and Chicago. Meanwhile, back in LA where protests started, further arrests have been reported as a downtown curfew remains in place for another night. The US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says that 5 of its workers have been killed in an attack by Hamas. Later today, the UN General Assembly will vote on a draft resolution that demands an immediate unconditional ceasefire after the US vetoed a similar effort last week. Meanwhile, Israeli members of parliament have rejected a preliminary vote to dissolve the Knesset after an agreement was reached over a dispute over conscription. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has avoided an early election, with 61 lawmakers opposing the movement. US President Donald Trump says some US personnel are to be pulled from the Middle East because it could become a dangerous place amid tensions with Iran. Discussions over a nuclear deal with Iran have stalled, and the country has threatened to target US military bases if conflict breaks out. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says he is very happy with the trade deal which has restored a fragile trade truce with China. Meanwhile, President Trump says he is willing to extend the July 8th deadline for completing trade talks with countries before higher US tariffs take effect. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has marked Russia Day, reaffirming a call for peace in the war with Ukraine. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to continue supporting Russia, calling Putin his dearest comrade. Japan has voiced concern, accusing Chinese fighter jets of flying unusually close to Japanese military patrol planes over the previous weekend. Tokyo's comments come after 2 Chinese aircraft carriers were spotted operating simultaneously in the Pacific for the first time. Australia's Defence Minister says he is confident that the AUKUS submarine pact with the US and Britain will proceed after the Pentagon said it was reviewing the pact to make sure it aligns with Trump's America First agenda. In 2023, Australia committed to spend $239 billion over 3 decades. We start this hour with some breaking news in Europe. Russia has reportedly unleashed a deadly drone barrage in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, killing 6 and injuring dozens more, including children. The 9-minute strike hit apartments, homes and even a school courtyard. This comes after Russia launched 2 of its biggest air attacks of the war earlier this week. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the onslaught proves Moscow isn't facing enough global pressure. Meanwhile, energy attacks have plunged 2 southern regions, Kherson and Mykolaiv, into blackouts. This, of course, coming as global diplomatic pressure on a ceasefire ramps up on Russia. We head over now to North America, and protests against US President Donald Trump's immigration raids are spreading across the United States, despite warnings from the White House. In Los Angeles, demonstrators hit the streets for a 6th straight day as military troops stand by. Authorities in Spokane, Washington, have declared a curfew from 9:30 p.m. to 5 a.m. following protests against President Trump's immigration crackdown. Mayor Lisa Brown announced the measure to maintain order. Trump says he won't allow mob rule in America. His press secretary blamed California leaders for fanning the flames. Let's have a look at what the US press secretary has had to say.
President Trump was in contact with Governor Gavin Newsom despite some of the claims he's made in the last couple of days. The president called the governor on Friday evening and told him to let law enforcement in California do their jobs. And the Los Angeles Police Department, by the way, are fantastic people. They are trying to do the work that they've so bravely signed up to do, to enforce the law, but they have been kneecapped by it's a good question the president is raising, and one we are looking into, about who is funding these insurrectionists and these rioters and these protesters and these illegal criminals. And I have updates for you on the numbers, by the way. Since June 6th, there have been 330 illegal aliens that have been arrested as part of these riots in Los Angeles. 113 of those illegal aliens had prior criminal convictions. And overall, and this includes arrests of American citizens, there's been 157 people arrested for assault and obstruction-related charges, including the attempted murder of a police officer with a...
Meanwhile, Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth told lawmakers the deployment of over 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines is lawful and constitutional. While in Mexico City, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed that 61 Mexican nationals have been detained. She slammed the US raids but denied encouraging protests or violence. Back in Los Angeles, Mayor Karen Bass says the unrest was provoked by the White House. She's demanding a direct conversation with President Trump. District Attorney Nathan Hochman pledged to protect peaceful protesters but warned that violent offenders will face charges. Over a dozen people now face prosecution, including 2 men accused of throwing Molotov cocktails. At the same time, US Attorney Bill O'Reilly vowed more arrests after charging 2 men for throwing Molotov cocktails during LA protests. He warned rioters, "This is the beginning, not the end." Let's take a look at that statement.
We are announcing that we have filed federal criminal complaints against 2 defendants who engaged in violence during the recent civil unrest. The last few days, we have seen vicious attacks on our agents and our properties here in the federal government. The escalation of violence by these rioters poses a serious threat to our agents and the safety of the public. Throwing rocks, explosives, assaulting agents, and committing other acts of violence are extremely dangerous and will not be...
On the military front, Major General Scott Sherman said Marines are not conducting arrests and will not carry live ammunition. He confirmed the troops are in training and will soon deploy to assist with civil disturbances. Here is what he said.
So, with our orders directed by the President, the Secretary of Defense has mobilized. Right now it's 4,700 personnel, so 4,000 from the California National Guard, 700 Marines. And our mission is to protect federal agencies, our federal partners.
Well, moving on now to the Middle East, and tensions are running high between the US and Iran as nuclear talks teeter on the edge. Iran's foreign minister says a deal is within reach ahead of a fresh round of indirect talks in Oman this Sunday. Tehran insists it will continue enriching uranium under UN supervision and wants all sanctions to be lifted. But President Trump isn't convinced, expressing doubts Iran will stop enrichment, a key US demand. His envoy, Steve Witkoff, plans to meet Iran's top diplomat to push for a new agreement. Trump has warned that if talks fail, military action is on the table. In a sharp warning, Iran's defense minister said it would strike US bases in the region if conflict breaks out. Meanwhile, the US is moving some personnel out of the Middle East amid growing security concerns. Partial evacuations have been ordered in Iraq, Bahrain and Kuwait, as Israel is also rumoured to be preparing for possible action against Iran. With diplomacy stalled and threats mounting, the region is bracing for a critical turn. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe from the Kotalawala Defence University, who is joining us from Colombo. Dr. Amarasinghe, the narrative in these discussions and disagreement between Iran and the US has shifted in the past 24 hours. Direct threats from Iran saying that strikes on US bases in the region could take place if conflict breaks out. Also, Donald Trump saying that troops in the region might be moved. How significant are these developments in the ongoing tensions between the two countries?
Absolutely significant. First and foremost, we have to understand the so-called nuclear talks between the two countries have been ambivalent from the very outset, because neither party wanted to have a long-lasting peace or a permanent solution. In particular, when the Americans demanded from Tehran to curtail the uranium enrichment, which was quite impossible with the Tehranian regime, because they simply wanted to have the nuclear weapon once and for all. So the quandary, this complexity was the moot point between the two countries, the peace talks, the nuclear talks, whatever they were. But when you look at the current developments, say for the past 24 hours, mainly the President Trump's the decision to partially evacuate the American embassy in Baghdad, and also the removal of the US personnel in the Middle East, which is a kind of a alarming situation, because we know the United States has dozens of military assets in the Middle East, in particular in places like Qatar and Bahrain, and also in Saudi Arabia. They can be easily targeted by the Iranian regime. But now the question comes to the fore is the fact that we really don't know what sort of military capacities are being possessed with Iran, because since the Israelis destroyed their air defense system, S-300 system in last year, their air defense system has been quite vulnerable. At the same time, these kind of macho remarks, the threatening remarks coming from Tehran is not something new. If you can remember what happened in 2020 after the assassination of the General Soleimani, they made the same statement. Actually, they went further. They attacked certain American assets in Baghdad, in Iraq, some naval bases. But they could not completely annihilate or destroy, or rather they could not make severe damages to the American assets. So that is something that we need to understand if you look at the ground reality, to which extent the Iran has the capacity to retaliate or to attack American bases in the Middle East still remains questionable.
Yes, Dr. Amarasinghe, of course, further rounds of indirect talks are set to take place in Oman over this nuclear deal. How influential could these comments from Donald Trump and the Iranian Defense Minister have in these discussions?
I think they will be quite influential. We have to understand that, as I clearly stated, that Iran would not commit harakiri by going for a waging war with the United States that will definitely drag Israel as an ally of the United States in the Middle East. So they would be quite cautious. And at the same time, we should not forget the fact that the current Iranian regime is at stake, as the country itself is facing a huge economic crisis, an economic problem, which is booming in Tehran, and the civilian population is quite uncertain about what their government is up to do. So the discussion, the peace talk, which is proposed to be held on the 12th of June, is extremely crucial. Especially they have to sort out the major dilemma regarding the enrichment of uranium enrichment. This has to be somehow decisively decided in this upcoming the discussion between the two countries on the 12th of June. At the same time, we should not forget the fact that here the partnership coming from Russia is another considerable factor, because a Russian envoy to the Middle East has clearly stated that Russia would support Iran on behalf of reducing the uranium enrichment.
Yes, and Dr. Amarasinghe, you mentioned Israel there. Of course, the US allied with Israel, and Iran have been involved with proxy groups that Israel have gone to war to. Reports suggesting that Israel could be preparing a strike on Iran. How would that escalate the current situation, and could that lead to a US-Iran conflict?
Doubt. Well, actually, not only Israel, even the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has stated quite recently, probably yesterday, that they can always have the access for the security of Israeli nuclear entitlement within Israel. They can attack that in retaliation. So if Israel enters the game, because you see, so far, up to now, both Israel and Iran have engaged in a proxy warfare. The Iranians have been using the Houthis in Yemen. At the same time, they try to undermine and they try to assassinate, or they may try to attack the Israeli interest around the world indirectly. Up to now, neither country have engaged in a direct warfare. So if there is going to be an escalation, it will be extremely detrimental for the entire geopolitical security architecture in the Middle East. And I must confess the fact that If you look at the military infrastructure-wise, Israeli army, in terms of the technology and also in terms of the air supremacy, they're ahead of the curve. They can easily debilitate the entire security apparatus of Iran, for sure.
Absolutely. Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe, thank you ever so much. Well, staying in the region, Israeli lawmakers have narrowly rejected an opposition-backed bill to dissolve parliament and trigger early elections. In a vote early on Thursday, 61 out of the 120 members of parliament voted against the proposal, while 53 supported it. The opposition introduced the bill, hoping to force snap elections with support from ultra-Orthodox parties. These parties are upset with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the contentious issue of military conscription for deeply religious Jews. The close vote highlights ongoing tensions within Israel's political landscape, but Netanyahu's government remains intact for now. Well, joining us to discuss these developments in Israeli politics amid an ongoing war with Hamas in Gaza, Yossi Kupawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert who is joining us from Tel Aviv. Yossi, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us. This vote has been denied, 61 members of the parliament voting against it, but this does show disagreement and discontent within the parliament. What can you tell us about the current political situation within Israel?
First of all, thank you for having me. And secondly, for me, it was expected that they would.
We have an issue with Yossi Kupawasa's signal, so we will be moving on. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reaffirmed his support for Russia, calling President Vladimir Putin his dearest comrade. In a message marking Russia Day, Kim praised their ties as a genuine relationship between comrades in arms and vowed to strengthen North Korean and Russian relations. Earlier this year, Pyongyang confirmed for the first time that it had sent troops to fight for Russia in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin is calling for increased focus on the country's nuclear triad in its new arms program. Speaking at a high-level defence meeting, Putin said land, sea and air-based nuclear forces remain the guarantee of Russia's sovereignty and are crucial to global strategic balance. Putin claimed that 95% of Russia's strategic nuclear arsenal is now fully modernised, a figure he says is the highest among all nuclear powers. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed support for the Russian people's aspirations for a brighter future on Russia Day. In a statement, Rubio reaffirmed America's desire for constructive engagement to help bring about a durable peace in Ukraine. Russia Day marks Moscow's 1990 declaration of sovereignty, a key moment before the fall of the Soviet Union. Marco Rubio said the US hopes that peace can lead to stronger, mutually beneficial ties between Washington and Moscow. Meanwhile, Russia's new ambassador to the US, Alexander Darchayev, has presented his credentials to President Donald Trump, vowing to work to fully restore bilateral ties. Relations have shown signs of improvement since Trump took office, with both sides discussing a possible resolution to the war in Ukraine. Moving on, President Donald Trump is open to renewing communication with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The White House said on Wednesday that Trump remains receptive to correspondence with the North Korean leader. Let's listen in to what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said.
The president remains receptive to correspondence with Kim Jong-un, and he'd like to see the progress that was made at that summit in Singapore, which I know you covered in 2018 during his first term. As for specific correspondence, I'll leave that to the president to answer.
The two leaders held 3 high-profile summits during Trump's first term, marked by friendly exchanges but limited progress on denuclearization. This comes amid recent efforts by South Korea's new president to restart dialogue with Pyongyang. As regional tensions simmer, Washington's signal suggests diplomacy may not be off the table. Heading back to Europe, the European Union and Britain have sealed a post-Brexit deal to ease border flow in Gibraltar. The agreements end years of uncertainty and promises smoother crossings for residents and workers. British Foreign Minister David Lammy said the deal provides certainty for Gibraltar's sovereignty and economy. He compared the new border system to French police working in London's St Pancras station. Here is what the British Foreign Minister has said.
Today we have reached a historic solution that I believe is pragmatic and gives the people of Gibraltar the certainty they need for their sovereignty and their prosperity over the years ahead. This is a good arrangement that deals with the complexity of the current arrangements that mean that people have sometimes queued for hours and has harmed the certainty.
Well, EU Trade Chief Markos Sefcovic called the agreement historic and said it strengthens relations between the EU and Britain. Both sides hope this deal marks a new chapter in their post-Brexit relationship. Let's listen to what the EU Trade Chief had to say.
We have worked intensively towards an EU-UK political agreement on the core elements of the future relationship concerning Gibraltar. This agreement also clearly reflects a strategic and cooperative approach aimed at strengthening our relations in the context of the UK's departure from the EU, and I would even say it reinforces a new chapter in our relationship.
Moving on now, a massive fire erupted in China's southwestern city of Chongqing, engulfing a motorcycle parking lot in flames. Social media videos captured the intense blaze with thick black smoke pouring into the sky as bystanders ran from the scene, covering their faces. The fire broke out Wednesday afternoon in the Jielongpo district. According to local authorities, it was first reported at 1:12 p.m. and extinguished within 21 minutes. No casualties have been reported so far. Reuters verified the location using building signs, road layouts and tree placement matching satellite images. The exact cause of the fire remains under investigation. Japan has condemned the unusually close approach of Chinese fighter jets to its military patrol planes over the weekend. 2 Chinese jets flew as close as 45 metres to Japanese aircraft in international waters near Okinawa. Japan's defence ministry reported 1 jet chased a Japanese plane for 80 minutes, raising safety concerns. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi expressed serious concern to China and demanded the incidents not happen again. This comes as China operates 2 aircraft carriers simultaneously in the Pacific for the first time. Japan vows to monitor its airspace closely and maintain communication with Beijing. Moving on now, Australia says its historic AUKUS defence pact with the US and the UK remains on track even as Donald Trump's new administration launches a formal review. Defence Minister Richard Marles said on Thursday he's confident the $239 billion nuclear submarine programme will continue as planned. The Albanese government has pledged to work closely with Washington to ensure progress. The Prime Minister is expected to meet President Trump next week on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada. Top of the agenda, a US request for Australia to raise the spending from 2% to 3.5% of GDP. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who signed the deal under Joe Biden's administration, says America has every right to review, but there's no cause for concern. Australia is set to make a $2 billion payment to the US next year to boost submarine production, with delivery of 3 US Virginia-class subs expected from 2032. Moving on, tensions are escalating in Bolivia, where deadly unrest has claimed at least 3 lives, including 2 police officers and a firefighter. Clashes broke out in the southwestern town of La Lugua on Wednesday as supporters of former President Evo Morales confronted police trying to clear roadblocks. Officers responded with tear gas while protesters hurled stones and firecrackers. The violence spread to other regions, including Cochabamba and Paratani, leaving dozens injured. Officials say police were attacked with explosives and one officer remains in critical condition. Morales' followers began blocking roads on June the 2nd after he was barred from running in the August 17th elections. The protests have grown into a broader movement against President Luis Arce, fueled by economic woes, shortages of fuel and foreign currency. President Arce has condemned the violence and vowed to keep highways clear. Meanwhile, Morales' supporters continue to demand his return to power. Moving and staying in South America, Brazil's Supreme Court favours tougher social media rules. 6 of 11 judges want platforms like X, TikTok and Facebook to remove illegal content without court orders. The move targets fake news and hate speech spreading online. Judge Flavio Dino said freedom must come with responsibility. Google opposes the change, saying it won't stop harmful content. The ruling will impact millions of users. This happens amid ongoing trials against former President Jair Bolsonaro, accused of using social media to spread lies and plan a coup. President Lula supports speeding up social media regulations to protect democracy. Heading back to North America now, Harvey Weinstein has been found guilty of sexual assault in New York. A Manhattan jury convicted him on one of the 3 counts after 5 days of tense deliberations. The jury found him guilty of assaulting former production assistant Miriam Haley. They cleared him of 1 charge and are still deciding on another involving actress Jessica Mann. Weinstein faces up to 25 years in prison. He already has a 16-year sentence from a Los Angeles conviction. The verdict follows explosive courtroom drama and juror disputes. Weinstein denies all charges. Here is what the victim, Miriam Haley, had to say after the verdict.
But today's verdict gives me hope. Hope that there is new awareness around sexual violence and that the myth of the perfect victim is fading. And I hope that this result empowers others to speak out and seek justice.
Well, that's all we have time for. We'll continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.